It's sad to say, but I think that it is the right time. It feels right to me. It's been a very rewarding, very fulfilling ride doing this podcast with you. And the best part of it, Liz, you know what it is. It wasn't any of the loose random connections. It wasn't the randomness that we benefited from. It was hanging out with you and our relationship that has grown out of it. And out of all the people that we've talked to and all the amazing things that they've done, the person that I've learned the most from is you, for sure.
Kyle, what's going on?
If you go back to the first episode, that's how we started the first one. It was just uncut. It was like we were just like having a conversation, but then we were being recorded.
I mean, that's what podcasts are.
That was a long time ago. How long ago was that?
That was March of 2020.
And we're in July of 2024.
2024.
You never got better at math. It's like 4 point something years.
We didn't start this podcast to get better at math.
4.3? 4? I don't know.
I'm not going to change.
I know you know already.
It's not important. We're here. Why are we here, Kyle? What episode is this?
Well, we're here because we got a burrito at the Tuscaloosa and Moe's 5 years ago. Actually, really, we're here because I picked up a newspaper article at a basketball game that I didn't want to go to.
That's right.
So there's almost an infinite number of answers to that question. But we're here today to have the final, even though I said this on the Nat episode, the final episode of the Lewis and the final episode of the Lewis and Kyle show, which is
finale, the grandest finale.
It's sad to say, but I think that it is the right time. It feels right to me. I don't know if it feels right to you. It's been a very rewarding, very fulfilling ride doing this podcast with you. And the best part of it, Liz, you know what it is. It wasn't any of the loose random connections. It wasn't the random randomness that we benefited from. It was hanging out with you and our relationship that has grown out of it. And out of all the people that we've talked to and all the amazing things that they've done, the person that I've learned the most from is you, for sure. In a wide,
like you're coming into this unprepared,
wide variety of ways. I'm completely unprepared.
It doesn't sound that way.
Well, I'm a orator. I've been listening to Alexander Hamilton.
You're like young Alexander Hamilton.
I'm Alexander Hamilton, fresh off the biography. That's why. But no, it's been a wonderful experience. And as I said, I think early in the conversation when you called me unemotionally and we're like, this is what in the podcast and how you do things. And I was like, well, it's definitely going to make the first paragraph of our Wikipedia page, which I think is definitely true. It's been so personally rewarding that I would recommend it to anybody. And yeah, so that's my unthought out, unplanned monologue on what the Lewis and Kyle show has done for me over the last 4 point something years.
It's funny to think about what's changed and what hasn't changed about us from the journey. I still think we were still very squarely, in a lot of ways, who we were in some very foundational ways, right? Mm-hmm. I'm still very logical and structured and rational, and you're still much better at the side of things that aren't that.
I feel like we're still the exact same, we're the same people as we were when we were like 5 or whatever. There's some tools that change, but the core personalities.
We've learned some things.
Yeah, we've learned some things.
Did not change our genetics. That's
right. Those things haven't changed for sure. the contact book and the people and the knowledge has changed, but that's
the brain, the learnings.
Right. Lewis's learnings.
That was a chapter.
I think that we can start out the section of just talking to each other about what we've learned and I think it's related to what we're saying now and what we said with Nat, which was so crazy, by the way. We have to talk about that situation, that story in more detail, but people are people, and that's one thing I think that we've learned together on this show. I mean, it's not like we've had the craziest, most famous A-listers ever, but I guarantee you it'd be the same thing. And all the famous people we've ever met, it's the same thing. People are people. Me and you are people. And I think that breaking that wall down for us so early on I don't even know if it's good or not, but it's definitely something that we both gain from this podcast.
It's come up on a lot of episodes, the idea of piercing the veil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that you see. It's the classic quote that everyone butchers, but it's until you make the unconscious conscious type thing, you just don't know what's going on. I think there's so many things that were mystified to us that have become demystified. And that was a lot of our attention. There were things we wanted to achieve, whether it's making some money, getting popular on social media, how to start this kind of business, how to write a book, and basically you talk to anyone who's done that thing and you're like, oh, well, they were a person and they did it and I'm a person and I could do it. And all these things just got demystified and just the veil was pierced of these institutions that feel like otherworldly. It's but everyone's just a person and everything's just, they figured out the steps required and they just did the steps.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, the reason I say I don't know if it's a good or bad thing is because I think there's benefit to having that, boss, hero worship kind of thing. It's just, the veil is pierced, I feel like, with everybody. And that's one thing that the podcast has given us, whether or not it's good or bad. It's other than Nat Eliason, it's it's just pierced,
Mm-hmm. But I think it doesn't keep you from looking up to people. You just compartmentalize.
Yeah.
You're I don't want to be that person, but I do want to do this thing the way that person does that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's I don't want to be Michael Jordan. That's a bad example because I have no follow-up to that. If I look, I still frequently do look at vision board style, mood board style, inspirational style things. And there are people on it that I know have some serious flaws in their background. Mm-hmm. But it's I really look up to Andy Frisella, but I don't want to not have kids by the time I'm in my late 40s. Right. And it's not, that doesn't, but just because of that, I'm not well, he's kicked off the inspirations list forever. It's no, I like that he's no BS. I like that during, 2020, 2021, he was one of the first people to call out BS that went against the narrative, and he thinks for himself and he's aggressive and he's confident. And, I don't want to be like he is in the sense that he doesn't have kids, but I can get over that and learn from the guy. And same thing with everyone that we've met. None of them have been none of them have been a letdown at all, but none of them have been such a total letdown to the point where I'm oh man, I can't believe I ever admired this aspect of this person.
I love that. People, there's so many components to people. And it's each one exists in its own. I mean, Alexander Hamilton had a lot of things that he did wrong, and big glaring mistakes and so does everybody, and I think that makes, and we are going to as well. One thing that I learned was that people forgive mistakes. Perfection is impossible, and it's okay to not do things perfectly. And I feel like I learned that early on, and I had to learn it early on. Especially, I think about this one moment where we were recording intros, and you've just always had a power of oration from debate and just being good at coming off the top.
Number 8 which is I like to yap. Like genuinely, that's a takeaway. Some people don't like to yap. Some people don't like to gab. I like to gab. I will talk for 30 minutes at length with no interruption. Like I need to be mindful of how long I can go uninterrupted without stopping speaking. That is something I learned. That is a skill that not everyone has that I should continue to use.
And you could just keep yapping about that. But the point is that you're very good at it. And it was hard for me to even to speak alongside you because I felt insecure. And I remember this moment where we were recording an intro, and I was like, I just have to, there's no way around this. Like, I just have to not be perfect. Like, it's fine, And that really, that moment specifically sticks with me.
I like that. Second takeaway from me is you need to just do the same thing for a long time. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about the Naval thing, Naval's thread, his book, Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I did at one point in the course of this podcast meet Eric Jorgensen in person, and that was really cool. At one point, he's very tall. He's so tall. And part of that book talks about the 4 kinds of luck. And the 4th kind of luck is when somehow things find you. Like there's random luck and then there's strategic luck. I'm totally butchering what they are. But the fact that we started this podcast, we say as a joke, but also literally, because it is somewhat literally true, to meet Nat Eliason, right? That was a factor. He's an example, he's an epitome, he's an archetype that represents an idea of there are very cool entrepreneurs that do the type of thing that we want to do, that have the knowledge that we want to have, and how do we get access to them? How do we become their friends? How do we get them to respond to us on Twitter? How do we just if we have a question, we could actually reach out to this person and they would respond. And Nat Eliason was the entrepreneur that at that point in our lives, we just really looked up to. And we're he's brilliant. He's all these great ideas. He's doing everything that we want to do, but we're no one to him. We're just another name on an email list. How do we get his attention and not be annoying either? And people might not believe it, but the podcast came about because he DM'd me. Out of it's just he just showed up in my inbox one day. It was hey, you should read a copy of my book because your name, I was talking to, people about things and your name came up. And that's what happens when you do the same thing for a long time. We'll talk about some of the business stuff, right? We didn't really talk about this yet, why we're shutting down the Lewis and Kyle show, what's coming next. But spoiler alert, it has mostly to do with just practical business decisions at the end of the day. And more than that in terms of the chapters of life and kind of recognizing that we achieved what we set out to achieve. And now what is the best course of action for what we both mutually wish to get from life next? And for me, that is just focusing on fewer things, doubling down on what's working. I started the podcast in a lot of ways to find and stumble through a path to entrepreneurship. I laid this out very explicitly that I was I don't have any business ideas I want to start right now. I don't want to just start a business for the sake of starting a business. So what can I do to busy myself usefully until then? I can build a network, I can build audience, I can learn, I can talk to people who've done it, I can accumulate knowledge and distribution and network. And ultimately, the culmination of those things was so massively helpful in eventually launching a business that, has been sustaining me for a couple of years and is kind of what I'm continuing to bet my career on. And likewise, I think kind of making that my focus and continuing to double down on that will be good. But to conclude the takeaway of number 2, which is do the same thing for a long time, everything in business, referrals, things don't happen overnight and people take a long time to be ready to buy from you. I think there are also some interesting dating metaphors that I don't necessarily think I need to elaborate on, but I think a lot of people, we're just talking about settled agriculture versus being nomadic and being a hunter-gatherer. Just certain things will not happen to you unless you stay put. It's kind of what Warren Buffett says, and whether or not this is attributed to Warren Buffett is apocryphal the right word, it doesn't matter. The point is you can't make a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant. And I think that's the problem with a lot of life hacky type advice is they don't think through the ways in which the simplistic rational parallelism, and that sounded like word salad.
Simplistic parallel national.
Oh my goodness. The point is you can't just transfer. Like it's not the formula for making a baby isn't like, well, if one woman times 9 months equals baby, then one baby is also equal to 9 women 1 month, right? And a lot of people think with all these other systems, they simplify the system in a way that no longer represents the underlying reality that it's modeling. And that's where things fall apart. So it's like on Tinder, for example, you're like, I'm going to spend 10 seconds evaluating 1,000 women. And that's the same as like spending, 10,000 seconds with like 5 different women or something. And so the point, like Cole, you can't just, people always say, if I send this message to 100,000 people, 1% of them is going to reply. Cause like whatever. It's like, no, like 0% of them are going to reply. Yeah. Cause it's just a bad message versus like if you put a good message in for 10 people, you do have reason to believe that 2 of them will. So the point is you got to just stick with things sometimes. For a long time. And that's just one limited example of like Nat coming to us on the like towards the 11th hour of the podcast, really past the 11th hour.
No,
so many things like happened over the years. So many of the coolest interviews that we had came inbound, which is hard to believe when we first started.
Yeah, is you got to continue to do it for a long time for anything good to happen. Well, not anything. You know what I'm saying. I love that one. I think one thing, the next one for me is that too much advice is bad. You can have too many examples. You can have too many ways that you can make money. You can have too much noise. And I think that that's obvious, but like, when you're doing, I don't know what the peak was. There was a few weeks where we did a lot of podcasts and it's like
some months where we did like 20 within a month, right?
Yeah.
It feels possible.
And it's like, this is way like,
we did 3 in the same day.
The information is just not useful at that point. And I think that is a lot of what social media and just consumption today in general is. And I think that this ties into another one of my learnings, which is know what is important to you. Like for the podcast, it's not a big podcast, but it was never important to us to have a big podcast. And if it's like how much more useful are the podcasts that you do now with newsletter authors or fill in the blank example. It's just, and this is another thing that I've learned that I'm not even good at, but I think that it's really, really, really true, is the best thing that you can do for yourself is to be able to communicate where it is and what it is that you want and where you want to go. Like,
you've been saying that since day one.
I don't know if I've been saying it since day one, but it's only become more and more clear to me that
I have like a vivid memories of you hounding people in college. I was like, but what do you want? You have to know what you want. Like, I remember it's because you're like, it's so powerful. So, like, you have known this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's only become more true. And
exactly. It's great advice. I'm saying, like, this is really to your credit kind of point.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Chill, Lewis. The point is that it is better to make something up, to lie about what you want, than to not have anything to say, because of the way that people's brains work. People want to help you. They want to lend a hand. They want to introduce you to that person. And if you can't communicate that you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, then I can't introduce you to the people that I know that are in that world. And so know what's important to you is really important. And it's like, I am totally at peace with the podcast today and the podcast as it was the entire time that it existed, because we knew, or I knew, the numbers were never important to me. And that's really true. It just never was. What was important to me was you and talking to really interesting people. And so because I knew that, and because I know that now, I'm totally at peace with it. You know what I mean? And I think that you can apply that more broadly, but that's one of the things that I really learned from doing the podcast.
I think that's awesome. Number 7 on my list, I skipped several, is repetition. I feel like maybe this is a short one, but another just fundamental law of human nature is...
Well, let me just... So
you got to hammer it in.
Well, I wrote down focus is what is cool. And I think that that's a similar point. It's like repetition is focus, right? Basically. What do you think about that statement?
I feel like you could write an article that would be like, that's a good point. I think they're different things, but they're the same. Like they're similar. Like they're...
Well, I was thinking earlier about how Nat's music was video games.
I see what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, there's an overlap and there's a lot of similarity and there's a lot to be learned about the other from the one. Mm-hmm. I bring repetition because there's so many damn times we've needed to hear the same thing until it just hits. It's like, I've said this on a million podcasts that, like, I don't think cliche advice is bad because it's like, you need to hear it. It's just, is it bad advice? Like, you've heard it before, it doesn't make it bad. Like, you're not doing it's bad. And that's helpful that if it's just everyone repeating the basics, it's not like the novelty is not what matters. Like another thing on my list is that there just are no shortcuts. Like I think that was a takeaway from Nat's podcast, but it was also part of like every podcast, every interesting podcast as well. Because the few people who do get lucky, that's just not a strategy you can count on. And it's not something to pursue. Is like dumb, outrageous luck. Everyone who just worked on achieving a goal just worked on it for a long time and just did all of the things and put in a lot of, like, there's just just figure out what the fundamentals are and just attack them relentlessly and things will happen, but that's not banking on luck. So that was a bit of a jumble of a couple things.
I want to touch on the music thing and just focus.
Yep.
It's like one thing that Lewis and I found in the very, very most interesting people that we spoke with was that they were very into music at one point in their life. And it was like they were engrossed by it. And I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's just a deep, innate ability to focus on something that makes them so interesting and so successful in the latter places that they go. But focus is what is cool. It's what leads to what is cool. It leads to art and aesthetic and like beautiful things, you know, and everything. And like, go ahead.
I think there's two pieces to this, right?
Okay.
There's like focus on like not changing the lane that you're in, but with the musician specifically, you're just referring to raw concentration power as like just another big part of it. Like that wasn't like, it's like, are you only working on writing this book for the next 2 years and you're not taking on side projects or freelance work? Or you're only focused on growing this business?
Well, I guess I mean concentration then, because what I'm talking about is like in the moment,
pure concentration.
Right.
Like
that is what is cool.
Intensity and endurance.
Right.
Yeah. That's a big takeaways for sure. I mean, that's like what all of Cal Newport's books are about, is like how do you just create a life that allows for better concentration? Because it's like social media, does it impair your ability to concentrate? To a lot of meetings, the more minutes you accumulate of quality concentration, the better your life is.
Write that down. Record that.
Make sure we're recording.
I wish we were recording.
Yeah. That's the point of Cal Newport's book. Like all of them, in my opinion. and I just think it's facts. Like the more pure quality concentration you're having, just the better the outcomes. It's a simplistic filter, but I think it's like accurate. So there are no shortcuts. Document the journey. I just think, that's not my number one takeaway. I don't even know if it's not my fifth takeaway. It's just a takeaway. It's like, it is very cool to have this record of our life and to like go back through, be like, what did we do the past 4 years? It's like, I can at least point to 200 things we did. Here are 200 conversations we had. And like each one of those sparks a different set of memories that I now have record of. It's like, I was looking at the episode with Evan Carmichael and I'm like, we did that Thanksgiving Day of
Thanksgiving morning. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just a memory. You know what I mean? Forever.
Burned into our minds.
Of these, like, I remember where it was, like Victoria Ransom. I like recorded that on a bar stool in Joe Puccio's apartment in New York City. And like, that's a whole other thing, is how many like genuine real life friends I have that are because of the podcast. Like so many of them. Like Joe, someone who I hung out with in New York. I stayed with him. I've had other people stay with him. And that's just a real relationship I have, and someone I speak with often that we met through the podcast. And there's a number of those, but just anyway, it
gives you an anchor
that we documented.
Each podcast gives you an anchor to like recall back where you were at that point, and allows you to think about, and have more memories that otherwise would not come back to your mind. And I think that document the journey, whatever that looks like, does the same thing. I mean, writing, photos, etc. I think that photos are a really good one for me. And the way my brain works is just like, if I can look at a photo, I can just remember and like see it all, and it unlocks certain things for me.
I think another one I have, and then I'm ready to transition after you're done with your takeaways, is in terms of why we were successful in getting this off the ground and staying with it, was the specific commitment at the outset that was just well scoped. And, I don't know if it's the whole SMART goal thing is another like cliche, cringy, but true. And you don't need to like fully think through the checklist, because I've never successfully been able to like go through all 5 without my attention wandering, is specific commitments. We said 25 episodes, right? That wasn't too many that we couldn't do it. That wasn't committing the rest of our lives to the podcast. And we just set a good goal that was like measurable and achievable and somewhat time bound. And that got us off the ground. So I'm just glad that we did that. And I like want to reflect on that with other initiatives that I take on. It's just like good, effective planning that led to action.
And we had nothing to do. It was the middle of COVID. It's like, and we had, it was a good goal, and it worked.
How many people do you know during COVID that started podcasts or wanted to, but never?
I don't know. I remember reading one specific thing, and it was like a tweet or something. And it was like, in 4 years, when you are interviewing for a job and people ask you what you did during the pandemic, what are you going to say? And that was a big thing for me. And I was like, I don't want to have no answer. And then we did 75 Hard, and we started a podcast. So anybody wants to ask me that question, I've got to get an answer for you. But okay, I'm just going to run through a couple here. Knowledge becomes useful in ways you would not imagine. I just love studying, and I love talking to people, and there's so many benefits that come from it that you wouldn't expect or you wouldn't be able to predict. And it's just I just want to encourage people in this episode to not think that studying is a waste. And, I think that from the podcast, one thing that is true that I believe is that long-term friends are just better than loose connections. And I think the more long-term that things are, like Lewis and I have led very different post-college lives, in that Lewis has traveled a lot and I have traveled a lot, but I've stayed in the same place, which is Birmingham, where I'm from. And I I think that there's
I've moved
value
like 10 times.
to both of the ways that Lewis moved a ton. There's value to both of them. And, I think that there's trade-offs, and I've seen less of the world than Lewis has at this point, and I have less examples to draw from. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the things that I have are very, very deep, and that there's a lot of value in that depth. And I would encourage people to not want for novelty or chasing some like different version of what they think their life could be, in the possibility that they have really deep existing relationships that they don't really see without hearing this from me. And then the last one I think is that just money isn't everything. It's so hard to just not, my relationship with money and money in general is such a hard concept, but it's not everything. And it doesn't make you more happy the more you have, unless, one thing that I like and that I hear a lot in my head is that when you have no money, money solves all of your problems. But when you have money, money solves none of your problems. And I think that that's true. So it just, I don't know. It's at the beginning of this, we wanted to talk to rich people, and we wanted to make relationships with rich people. And I think that faded pretty quickly, or maybe that was just me. But I am, wealth is something that, I've seen a lot of, and I just don't, it's not everything. And at the same time, focus is what's cool. Concentration is what is cool, and that oftentimes leads to creating things that create a lot of money, which is really cool. And the things you can buy with money is super cool. Look, I'm going to make some money. It's just like, don't get caught up in it.
It's not everything.
It's not everything. And those are my takeaways. Lewis?
Money. I think Angelo is a good example of someone with focus and obsession who just is interesting because of his focus. Mm-hmm. And someone who, again, I had a very shallow relationship with. Like, I knew of him, and we've spoken casually a couple times before the podcast. And then now we're actually pretty close friends and have hung out like, it was at my birthday, my 22nd birthday party. That was a wild night in Vegas. And then my 25th birthday party was a wild night in Vegas. And Angelo was there for those 3 years apart. So that's what friendship is, I guess. Well, no, but we've also had a friendship outside those. He just lives in Las Vegas, and I only have so many friends there. So he's always there. But I'm really glad that like Angelo's been a great addition to my life. That's also attributable to the podcast, like marketing attribution, first touch, last contact, first point of sale. Podcast is how give it credit for a lot. I agree. I think, one thing I forgot to bring up on the conversation with Nat earlier today was the whole devil's bargain thing. And I just think all of these things that are like a devil's bargain or kind of a hidden trap are like novelty, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it is cool to travel a bunch and see new cities, but it's also like a trap because the depth thing. Like on Twitter, it's cool to like be on Twitter, connect with all these people, but it does like suck away a lot of your concentration powers. So these things are just devil's bargains. So that is my set of takeaways. I think I want to do the why, I guess, towards the end more clearly. Mm-hmm. But what are some turning point episodes that you want to discuss? I have a few. I cheated. I went through the YouTube feed and was like, which ones just really stuck out as like a major turning point? I think Vash is a big one. Vash set me on a whole... Vash was like a spark when I was running low on flames. And that was magical and like a super important intervention in my life. And still, I should just like spend weeks just reflecting on everything he's taught me, because repetition is a big thing. And I was all in and I learned a ton. And then, things happen and you fall off those things. And then but his wisdom was so good. Like, he was so on game across the board with things I was bad at. he was really gave some tools that were helpful for me and what I needed at the time and still probably need. So that's one that comes to mind. That was just like a total unexpected. He came out of nowhere and just came to change lives. So that was Vash. The Will Brown episode was another that really lit a fire under us. He was like the first guest that was younger than us and was the first like young person we saw who was super successful in life financially early. And that was a big thing. He just had such a free thinker, so high conviction in everything that he said that it really was a turning point, just seeing like a personality that was almost caricatured in terms of like how extreme it was, and not in like an insulting way to him. Just, you ever see people like on movies that are just so confrontational and like so over dramatized? You're like, there aren't real people like that. You know what I mean? Like I would like, that's what you would see like the show Yellowstone. I don't know if you ever saw Yellowstone, but there's scenes like in Yellowstone, you're like, people don't actually, like those scenes don't happen. And like that hyper dramatization is what makes the TV show so appealing. Or like someone just has a dialogue that's so witty, you're like, that would never actually happen. I feel like Will was just this character come to life of like this just fully self-confident, maybe somewhat arrogant, but like in a way that didn't bother me. When I call someone arrogant, it's like people would describe that person as arrogant. And I'd be like, yeah, fair enough. I don't know. And I just was like, what an interesting person. And I just was inspired by his confidence in a lot of ways. And it made me introspect for months and months and months and apparently years after the fact. I mean, that episode was more than 4 years ago. And I'm still just like, that's what I mean by a turning point. So that's two. I don't want to go through my whole list quite yet.
I was looking on YouTube, I couldn't find him. Robinhood, early investor.
Oh, Howard
Lindzen. Yeah, I'm not great with names.
Yeah.
Howard, for some reason, feels like a turning point for me. I don't know why. I think it was because it was so early, and it was like from when it was like the first one, I think, where we just went way beyond our network, and we were swimming in deep water with this guy who's like super successful and interesting, writes a blog every day, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that one kind of, it was like, okay, now we have a podcast, you know? And that one was super cool. The one that we did with Akira the Don was really wild because it was like we have had all these kinds of like straight-laced sort of people, and he is just doing his own thing and has come from his own world. And that one really like gave me the perspective that there's just there's so many worlds around us, you know? And like, if you're Lewis and Kyle, you're going to interview the same people, like, and there's just not that many people that are business owners that are really interesting, speak English. Like, there are a ton of them, obviously, but it's just,
we're not the only people trying to get Nat Eliason on their podcast.
Right. He was just completely different, you know? I think two of them that come to mind are David Oakley and Jeff Dugas, because I know both of them and they both had huge impacts in my life. And I felt like in the moment of doing the Jeff interview, I don't know about David's interview, but in the Jeff interview, it was like, okay, I have a skill of interviewing people and I am using that right now. And that was just like confirmation that I had learned a skill, you know? And yeah, those three come to mind immediately.
Cool. I love those. You reminded me of when I interviewed my grandma. That was cool. Like, I think that definitely brought us a lot closer, and something she really appreciated. And same thing, like I had the confidence that I would like do it well from the preceding 60 or so episodes. I think that those are some things, some notes there for like final takeaways. One other one that's really interesting. You always said, and you said it now, that you never cared about the numbers, and you mean it genuinely. Like, you truly never got caught up in it. I did get caught up in it many times, and like did care about, not at the outset, but some part of me was emotionally invested in wanting to be like a successful podcaster by traditional means. And maybe this is going to sound like cope, maybe. I don't know, this maybe won't come out the right way. But the Danco episode that we did, that felt like if this is what we wanted to turn this into, like we could actually do the whole, like if what we intended to do was the media company podcast then, like, because feeling like some part of me wanted it to be a podcast that made money from the sponsors and the ads and the views and kind of the whole shtick. Like that episode was like, we rented a nice studio. It came out incredible production quality. The editors nailed it. And it got like 10,000 views organically, which is like, you know, real numbers for a podcast. And
it was a good episode too.
It was a great episode. And like neither of us had scripts or anything in front of us. And it was just like, we held a conversation and it was like barely edited. That just was like, okay, we like we did, like it felt doable. I was like, if this is the path we wanted to go, we could. Like I've picked a different path and I'm committing to that path, but that felt real in that moment in retrospect. So I could reflect on 100 other interviews.
There was one moment that I want to talk about, which is Eric Jorgensen. I already mentioned him already. But at the end of, I think, the first Eric Jorgensen interview, he was like, I've done blah, blah, blah. I've done blah, blah, blah. You guys are
Pomp Show and David Perel Show.
I've done Pomp and David Perel, and you guys are really good. And there were like 3 or 4 other moments like that throughout our time. And like, you think about them, you know, like, you don't, kind words are so easy to say, but they stick with people, man. I mean, and in that moment stuck with me, and I'm sure it stuck with you too. But those little moments like that were huge, and those were turning points for us too.
Yeah, micro turning points. I realized I wrote down on my note, just like, I like to yap and I should use the skill. But like, I just should, like, you know, I'm not retiring from getting on camera. Like, it's just, there's a lot of parts of my job where I don't feel like I'm excellent. And that's frustrating for me a lot of the times in terms of like self-esteem and self-criticism. But I do feel like I'm just good at speaking and can just talk. And like Joe Wiebe, right? We haven't talked about Joe Wiebe. I did write him down, and so we'll get there. But he always gave me a ton of confidence saying I had this good skill set and something I want to continue. And the podcast was like it's just a reminder to continue to use that. So continuing on into why we are, unless you had any other turning point episodes.
I'm good. Go ahead.
I was going to say why we're transitioning, what's happening, and then just a few parting thoughts. So, okay, continuing on to why and what. Basically, for those of you who don't know, I am involved. Oh, one other thing I want to mention is like this cup. I've definitely had this cup since like
the very beginning.
Not on every interview, but like, I mean, I got this when I graduated high school, and I just like, wow, I didn't lose that cup. So that's cool. Anyway, the continuity. There's I should have worn like one of the shirts. I have like so many shirts that I've had for like the 4 years, like the one with the dice. And I'm just like still have that same shirt. These are the details that are less interesting. I have a company called Orbit, and that was that wasn't an edit in the cut. I just like made a hard pivot without the edits. I have a company called Orbit, and I've decided, and it's when we started the podcast, what were our goals at the time, right? We read blogs like Nat Eliason's, and we wanted to figure out how to and I wanted to figure out how to be an entrepreneur and how to like figure out like an internet remote income and start a business and be an entrepreneur and be self-employed. And like somehow I kind of stumbled into it. The podcast was instrumental in helping me get a lot of the jobs that I had along the way. It was also instrumental in terms of just everything that we've discussed and so much more. And ultimately, somehow I found myself in a point where I'm working with a team of some of my closest friends, and we run a real business, and we have employees, and I've been self-employed for almost 2 years by the business, and it's what I want to continue to do. I think on a personal note, a lot of the reason that the podcast publishing frequency started to taper in the past year or two has been that I just don't want all of my hobbies to be on a computer, genuinely. And like so much of my life has been digital that it's just like alarming. And I'm like, I have my business, and that requires me to be on the computer almost all day. And that's making money, and it's what I set out to do. And I really want to, again, focus as a superpower, just concentrate my efforts on growing the business and like building a real life in the world. That's not like the Twitter sphere and the YouTube sphere. And that's also why on your end, you also were putting less interviews on the calendar because your real life was just becoming deeper and richer coming out of the pandemic, right? Just like you have relationships and you have things that go on and you have family and you just like do activities, and you don't want to spend we love doing the podcast, but it's not often as fulfilling as just living life and being in person and just like having life experiences. So like, I like my business. I have a lot of passion for what we do, and I want to channel all of my screen time into my work. But I don't need more like digital hobbies. I just don't. And I think that in terms of what the podcast is going to turn into, I'm still going to enjoy it a ton, but I want to really get the bang for your buck, the 2-for-1 credit, and use the podcast as a way to just be, part of the marketing stack for Orbit, which is, the businesses that you can read more about below, I'm sure. Content marketing business, content production business,
every video now has Orbit.
Yeah, every video is definitely, it's there. Sponsors, buyer sells. And also what we do as well, like we didn't really touch on the impact the podcast has had, because I know it has. I've gotten DMs and comments and all those other things. And as we discussed kind of candidly, that wasn't why we started. That was an ancillary benefit that we knew would emerge. But we didn't start it for that reason. But I still think the kind of ongoing benefit of what we do, like people learn from these videos. I watch them. I literally have watched so many of our podcasts like several times on repeat, because this is just like good, useful information if you're in that headspace. And I want to continue to like extract practical, strategic, but also philosophical and emotional insights from people. Like learning from people is just super valuable, and I love interviewing, and that's what's going to happen. So I didn't give my shout out to Joe Wiebe, so I'll do that in a moment. But that's why we transitioned. What's coming next? Orbit Radio, baby. It is going to be the backbone of the content marketing for my business, which emerged from the podcast, which is full circle and beautiful.
After extensive negotiations, Lewis and I came to an agreement that transferred ownership of this asset. And yeah, I think, I'm engaged now. Shout out Caroline. She's been a part of my life for a lot longer than this podcast. I have a job, and I don't know. Life is just, it's hard to
You've launched your real estate investing career.
It's hard to continue to be looking for new advice and ideas from new people. Like I think that we just are at a point in our lives where it's time to focus on what it is that we're doing.
The answer is to work, right?
Yeah, and it's like there's just no benefit really for me to be on a podcast with people that are doing online newsletter marketing for them or for me. Like in this present moment, it's not to say that I wouldn't enjoy their company and have an interesting and deep conversation, but it's just that's the way it is. And Lewis offered to me to continue to be on, episodes. I think that we set out to accomplish what we set out to accomplish, or we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. And I'm totally at peace with the state and status and the future of the whole thing. And I'm just, I'm so grateful that we did it. And I think it's going to be, a small piece of the things that we accomplish in our lives. And I'm glad that we're not going to stop being best friends. So it's dope. And I obviously hope that you make millions of dollars from Orbit so that I can do cool stuff with you. We can go on trips to Bali.
Bali. Never heard it said like that, but
how did I say it?
No, Nat said Bali.
Oh yeah, intonation.
If you couldn't tell, we recorded this right after the episode with Nat. Like we literally said grand finale, in terms of ending with a bang. A couple thoughts that I just feel in the acknowledgement section of this episode.
Joe Wiebe.
Obviously, Joe Wiebe. I haven't talked to him that much, but we had a soul bond in terms of like, we just were intellectual soulmates. It just felt like we just hit it off like I never hit it off with any person in my life in terms of just.
You should go to Australia. I know not right now, but soon.
No, not right now, but soon. Scott has been another amazing friend. Joe and I just could not, like, that's like, this is the dumbest thing, but like, I literally can't reach out to him, and because we can't talk for less than 4 hours, and it just can't stop. It's just one of those things. So Joe's been an amazing friend. Scott has been an amazing business mentor. Scott McEwen has really given Sean and I a lot of critical advice in our journey, and has also been a great friend. And I feel like there's so many people I'm leaving out and forgetting to mention. Not that I'm going to like send this and guilt it to people to listen, just in terms of my own feeling like I did a good job with the acknowledgements. Obviously, Kyle, I don't know when we're ending this particular conversation. Got to give the big Kyle thank you, but I don't know if you have any other acknowledgements.
Caroline, my parents, all my friends who supported me and thought it was cool that I was doing something random and different. Your parents, yeah, that covers the gamut for me. I mean, all the people that were, Ethan, all the I mean, every single guest, it's like they gave us time and listened to us talk for an hour. So every single guest I am grateful to.
Lisa McKinney, David Sachs.
Yeah, just name them all off.
But I think I told the story when I ran a marathon. I like tried to just like list the guests in order forward and backward. It was like how I try to like distract myself from the pain.
That was like 2 years ago. It was probably 100, huh?
Yeah, it was weird. That was November of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So we were like high 30s.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was not that impressive of a list.
Yeah.
To like be able to recite from memory forward and backwards. It was like Nick Hutchison was like number is the highest on the list. He's also been a great mentor and someone I've kept in touch with offline.
Mm-hmm.
So Kyle, man, I'm having a hard time being sad because it's just the end of the podcast, but not the end of Lewis and Kyle.
You don't have to be sad.
You know what I mean? Because it just is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just grateful to you for, I think one thing that was a theme for me, maybe you can relate to it, maybe not, was that a lot of the things I started prior to this just didn't stay with for very long. And I feel like the accountability of having you along for the ride and like your support the whole time was like very critical in overcoming what felt like when you repeat the same failure, you start to believe it's just a fundamental part of you. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I just don't stick with things. I quit things. Like I not capable. That's just whatever that's just a permanent flaw. That's a permanent limitation. And I think when we started this, I wasn't the kind of person who was able to stay with the same thing for a long time. Mm-hmm. Just like jumped around a lot. And I think I haven't perfected the skill, but like we've done this podcast for 4 years. Like every time I see David Bailey, he's like, how many episodes are you guys up to? Like say the number, you're like, oh my God, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. And David Bailey from Bitcoin Magazine, because I saw him a few weeks ago and I was like, yeah, we're at like 200. He's like, no way. And like when we first told him it was at like 70, he's like, no way. And maybe he just like, that's his catchphrase is like, Bitcoin's at 69K. No way. Bitcoin's, I don't know. But that was a big lesson and a big growth moment that I give you a lot of credit for helping me overcome. Really, I think as much of our key, the Lewis and Kyle show, we've not been the focus of the interviews.
Never.
Like all of the work.
If you listen to every episode, you just would not learn that much. Continue, but you wouldn't learn that much about us.
Compared to the guests, for sure. Mm-hmm. Most of what I've learned from you really has come offline. Like it's just been like, this just isn't a friendship breakup. So I just, like, it's just not, it's just like, we've covered a lot of this. We've discussed the ways that like in which you're have skills I don't have, especially on like seeing emotional things and seeing just less frenetic, more grounded and more wise in a lot of ways. Whereas I feel like I try to be smart. You try to be wise a lot of the time. Even if it's intentional or unintentional on either account, it just is what it is. And those have just been lessons that, like, because of the podcast, we've become closer, which means we spend more time talking, which means there's more opportunities for you to just like continue to teach me things. It just feels like a separate conversation. The podcast, but that's not been the point of the podcast. The podcast has been like two friends unite to like bring things on. I mean, there's been tons of people that you brought on the show that I would have like never thought to reach out to just from your whole circle of the universe and ask questions that like, I can't remember if most of the impactful, I don't have a scorecard of like, of the ideas that I've heard that have resonated, was it me who asked the question, right? I don't know. My best guess is 50%, maybe it's 10%, but it's probably like, I don't know, like having you here led to so many outside perspectives and just an extra degree of entropy in a good way. Entropy is sometimes bad, but all of your entropy has been good.
What a compliment. All of your entropy has been good. I'm going to get that tattooed on me. I love you, bro. I'm proud of what we've done. And I think that this is only the beginning of a long line of different, interesting, what most people would call weird things that we're gonna figure out how to do together. So it's gonna be great.
Do you remember when I wanted to call it the First Quarter Podcast? That was like a very short-lived idea. That was like specifically at Edge.
First quarter, yeah, 25. I remember that.
We were on the other half of Edge, like you know how we're
in the
one half
in the weird like tornado shelter. Yeah,
not in the shelter, but like that side, sort of. Just the side we usually didn't work on.
And then there's
like the side further from the kitchen.
Quarantine Curiosity, like Time Billionaires, the First Quarter.
Yep.
All kinds of things. We kept it the same the whole wet free pod.
That would have been a good one.
That would have been awful. Oh my goodness. That was probably my idea.
No, I think it was mine. But I don't know if I'm still paying for that domain. I hope I canceled it and I'm $24 richer for having not paid for that for several years. The point is the first quarter, like I turned 25. It's a milestone B-Day. First Quarter Podcast was about how the premise was like, how are all these people, what did they do up until they're 25?
Right.
To like, or interview hyper successful people who are younger than 25. There's just an infectious energy to them. So I hit 25, news chapter. Kyle, much love right back at you, as always. It's been the Lewis and Kyle show. Kyle's not disappearing. I'm not disappearing. There's just new logos and new focuses.
Signing out.
So, dude, signing off. I don't want to like dig up the old music, but it would be kind of funny if like the music.
It's like the fade is really important here.
All right, are we stopping here?
We're stopping here, brother.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We didn't thank the listeners. Thank you for listening and making the number more than 0 of people listening. And for the people who reached out, thank you double for ever like reaching out and saying, commenting.
Thank you and good night.